We're in the middle of a series called Jesus Is, in which we're looking at the 7 I am statements in John's Gospel. And today's statement is, I am the Good Shepherd. So would you turn to chapter 10 in your Bibles, turn on your phones, or look at the screen. I'm going to start from verse 1. So we're going to read last week's passage again, in which Jesus describes himself as the gate or the door. If you remember, that's what we looked at last week. And then we're going to reread that section. Then we're going to go on to the rest of the chapter, because it's all part of the same teaching as Jesus talks about being the shepherd. So we'll go through to verse 21. So I'll read it quick. Here we go. I tell you the truth. The man who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. The man who enters by the gate is the shepherd of his sheep. The watchman opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. Everyone say voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. Jesus used this figure of speech, but they did not understand what he was telling them. Therefore, Jesus said again, I tell you the truth, I am the gate for the sheep. All who ever came before me were thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. He will come in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. Verse 11, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd who owns the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he's a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice. Everyone say voice. And there shall be one flock and one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father. At these words, the Jews were again divided. Many of them said, he is demon-possessed and raving mad. Why listen to him? But others said, these are not the sayings of a man demon-possessed. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind? So the last few sermons I have given have ended up following a bit of a pattern. I didn't mean that to be the case, and I don't want to be repetitive, but will you allow me again to begin just by confirming the face value understanding of what Jesus is saying here? I really want to emphasize that I believe in, accept, and am incredibly excited by the core gospel message here. It's important for me that you understand that these sermons are not about trying to find a new gospel, they're about going after the full gospel. What I've been preaching in these last few weeks is not in addition to the gospel. In fact, if they were in addition, it would be disastrous because we could take it or leave it. What I'm trying to go after is the full gospel. And if it is the full gospel, we've got to grab it with our hands and our hearts. Because I've come to realize that this gospel is way bigger than I thought it was. So let me affirm and fully endorse the face value, foundational and essential truth that Jesus is revealing about himself here. He is the good shepherd, verses 11 and 14. For those who are lost, Jesus is the one who will come and find you. He will go out into the wilderness, he will meet you there, and he will bring you home. Verse 3, he knows his sheep, and his sheep know him. Verse 4 and 14, and because he loves them, verse 13, he's going to die for them. He's willing to die for them. And he actually did that. It's called the cross, and it happened just over 2,000 years ago. In verse 18, he says he has authority not just to lay it down, but also to pick it up. That's his resurrection he's talking about. That also has happened. That's what destroyed death and activated for us eternal life, the eternal life that we've been exploring these last few weeks. The core teaching of Jesus is this: follow me and you will be saved unto eternal life. All good? Are we in agreeance, as my French teacher used to say? Yes, we are. It's the beautiful gospel. But the thing is that I feel Christians sometimes relegate the image of the Good Shepherd to Sunday school. For kids only. We've seen the picture. Jesus has kind eyes. He's got a crook in one hand and a lamb on his shoulder. There's a lovely hill somewhere in Oxfordshire behind him. I suspect that as adult Christians, we don't tend to think of ourselves that often as little vulnerable lambs. Lambs are babies. You lot look more like mutton. Speak for yourself. Speak for yourself. Grey when I was 25. But you see what I mean? I think we've become satisfied with the face value understanding of Scripture, so we've stopped short of deeper revelation. We've inherited a teaching that says this is about following Jesus. Therefore, it's about conversion, and therefore about getting to heaven when you die. So we've relegated the Good Shepherd to entry-level evangelism for kids. It's about coming to faith. It's for children as they learn to trust in Jesus. It's a nice access point. It's a lovely picture that lends itself to craft activities and coloring in sheets. We've lost the deeper understanding of what Jesus is revealing here about heaven and eternal life. Note that he's not talking to children here. He's talking to the religious leaders of the day. Highly regarded, very learned, huge social influence. This is not a Sunday school lesson. Over the last few weeks, we've been shifting our understanding about what eternal life actually is. It's not for when we die, it's for now. In the same way, we need to shift our understanding of what the Good Shepherd is, because unsurprisingly, if you've been following this series so far, there is deeper revelation for us here. So let's go deeper. Let me briefly bring us back to what we were discovering about heaven being open last week, because the door and the shepherd are part of the same teaching, part of the same passage, and the focus is very, very much still on heaven being open. So if you missed last week, it's available on the website. If you go to the website on Talks, you'll see that. Click on that. You'll get access to the sermons. But if you were here, you'll remember how we learned that we can go in and out of heaven now. That's what Jesus is saying. It's a life of heaven encounters in which the experience of the culture and the economy, the realities of heaven, the power of heaven, all the heavenly realm is available to us now to experience. And it's really important that that's true, because in order for our lives to manifest heaven on earth, we have to have access to heaven. You have to know what it's like to be able to replicate it. And Jesus has actually given us the ability by his Spirit to encounter heaven, to see the blueprint, I think I said last week, of heaven, so that we can replicate it on earth. Welcome to the normal Christian life. John 10, verse 9, whoever enters through me will be saved. He or she will go in and out and find pasture. It's the in and out of the open heaven. Belly buttons. The reason I'm laughing is that quite often when you preach, people get like, which is what you hope for. You hope you don't get. I just went belly buttons and looked at someone and they went, Yeah, belly buttons. I feel that's a word from the Lord. Belly buttons. Are you an innie or an outie? I was hanging out with some friends at university once. I can't remember what we'd been doing, but lots of time on our hands we were hanging out. And one of my mates was sitting on a sofa, and her boyfriend was lying on the sofa with his head on her lap. He was chewing gum. Yeah. It's another chewing gum story. Worse than last week's. Is that possible, Paul? Oh, yeah. He was chewing gum. I have no idea why he did this, but he lifted up his head, he pulled the chewing gum out of his mouth, and he popped it into his girlfriend's belly button and pushed it home. I don't know why he did it, but she squealed, and then something really weird happened. As she pulled the chewing gum out of her belly button, it changed shape. Not the chewing gum, the belly button. What had been an innie actually became an innie with a little bit that was an outie. Isn't that weird? So weird. Poor woman, both in and out. Very much like the life Jesus has opened up to us when he opened heaven for us. And now, we are all like my mate's girlfriend. We are all innies and outies. That's your link. Yeah. It's the in and out of heaven. There is so much revelation from the kingdom to be found in chewing gum. So, back to the Bible. We noted last week, back in. So we're in the same space as last week, okay? Heaven is open, and we can go in and out. That's what we're talking about. That's eternal life. Okay. And we noted last week, didn't we, that Jesus' choice of illustration when he's talking to the Pharisees was very intentional. First century Palestine, sheep pens, one way in, one way out, circled by a wall, open to the sky. The whole thing is speaking to an open heaven. So let's keep that open heaven in mind as we turn our attention to what Jesus has to say about being the Good Shepherd. Recap done. Sermon starts now, by the way, in case you think it's long. That's the start now. There are a couple of things I want to draw out of our message today. The first is the significance of who Jesus is talking to. Who's he talking to? The Pharisees. He says to them, I am the good shepherd. What does that mean? The Greek word is kalos, good. It means beautiful to look upon. Lovely. It also means well adapted to its intended use. Also helpful. Jesus came for a purpose. It was also used as a prefix to the name of someone in public office. It spoke of their competence and their ability to carry out their role, like saying the Honorable Lord Sheriff, the Kalos Lord Sheriff. That's helpful too. Competent and able to do what he came to do. It also means purity of heart. So it meant morally good, noble. All of that is helpful stuff and appropriate to Jesus. But I think the real significance is found in another meaning of kalos, which is true. Jesus is the true shepherd. Not just that what he speaks is true, but rather that he's the real shepherd. He's the legit shepherd. The only one with authority, verse 18, to open heaven. Why is that significant? It's significant because of who Jesus is talking to, the Pharisees. In the Old Testament, the concept of shepherd was used as a symbol of a royal caretaker for God's people. So in the Psalms, in Ezekiel and Isaiah, God himself is called the shepherd of the nation, the shepherd of Israel. And throughout the second half of the Old Testament, God is really strong in the way that he denounces through his prophets the failed leaders of Israel, who then at that time were the shepherds of Israel. So it's no accident that Jesus reveals himself here to be the true shepherd to the Pharisees, who in their day considered themselves to be the shepherds of Israel. It's really, really pointed image that he's painting for them. So just as the Old Testament prophets rebuked the failed national shepherds of their day, now Jesus, the ultimate prophet, is rebuking the Pharisees for their failure to shepherd the nation. But what is his rebuke? It's very specific. The rebuke is that they have kept heaven closed to the people. And that's why he's come to open it. They are impostors and hypocrites with no legitimate claim to be the true shepherds. That's why he calls them hired hands. Verse 12. They've stolen from the people their inherited right to access heaven. That's why he calls them thieves and robbers in verse 8. He's not impressed with these guys. It's his major beef with the Pharisees that they have shut the door of heaven. Their religious, politically motivated, rules-based teaching had actually pulled the people away from the sort of communion with the Father that would have opened up to them an incredible life of connection to heaven and the manifesting through those lives of the Father's will for the nation and the world. That was his desire for his people. Do you remember what he said to Abraham? The nation would be blessed to be a blessing. He always wanted his people to replicate heaven on earth. Matthew 23:13 stopped me in my tracks a couple of years ago, because in that verse, Jesus makes the same rebuke to the same people, but in the strongest terms. He's entered Jerusalem. He's coming to the end. He's ramping up his teaching, his prophetic acts, and his rebukes. And this is what he says to the Pharisees. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You shut the door of the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. You yourselves do not enter in, nor will you let those go in who are trying to. Another translation interprets enters in this way. What sorrow awaits you, teachers of religion, you Pharisees, hypocrites. You shut the door of heaven in people's faces. Listen to this. You yourselves do not go up, nor do you let others go up who are trying to. I mean, personally, I find that very interesting. Isaiah said this. Many people shall come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, and we shall walk in his paths. Mountain and house means heaven. Go up means come in, John 10:9. Teach us his ways means you will find pasture. In other words, revelation, authority, and power from heaven. And we shall walk in his paths means go out. We shall come in and go out. In other words, we will bring heaven back to earth and live a life on earth that leaks heaven. He rebukes the Pharisees because they have shut the door of heaven. They're actually guilty of closing what Jesus came to open. And in his rebuke, he reveals the core of his own ministry, the deepest desire of the Father's heart. You have shut heaven. You refuse to go up. I have come that my sheep may go up. Wow. What a Savior. Take a look at verse 2. Go on. No, I'm just kidding. Don't worry, it's fine. It's funny that no one moved. Verse 2 says this, the man who enters by the door is the shepherd of his sheep. What does that mean? The man who enters by the door is the shepherd of his sheep. I have a study Bible at home, which my mum gave me. And it's big and it's green and it's full of commentaries and cross-references and notes. It's incredibly helpful, except when you get to verse 2 of John 10. Nothing. Nada. Zip. And I reckon it was a Friday afternoon and they just thought, verse 7 says he's the door. Verse 11 says he's the shepherd. He's both. So how then can the shepherd enter through the door if the shepherd is the door? Nope. It's the weekend. I don't blame them. It's a very confusing verse. But as I was praying into this sermon, the Lord dropped a little phrase into my head which hasn't left. The voice is the door. The voice is the door. When Jesus is talking about being shepherd, he speaks a lot about his voice. Verse 3, he says he calls his sheep. Verse 4, he says that his sheep follow him because they recognize his voice. Verse 16, when he's talking about you and me, the Gentiles, he says, I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock. The shepherd is known by his voice. In first century Palestine, shepherds led their sheep. They didn't drive them. They went before them. Not how we see in our country now. He did not drive them. So they spent so much time together, sleeping out on the hills, watching their flocks by night, that the sheep learned to recognize the voice of the shepherd. So even when there were other shepherds and other flocks around, they would not divert from their course that their shepherd was leading them on, because they would go for his voice. It's the shepherd's voice that brought them to him. Jesus is the door, and Jesus is the shepherd's voice. The voice is the door. His voice is actually a doorway into heaven, which means that becoming familiar with his voice is an essential access point to the open heaven that Jesus is talking about. The voice activates our access to heaven. The voice is the door. Have you got, okay? So when the Lord gave me that phrase, he immediately gave me fresh eyes for John in Revelation. So we know that Revelation is a prophetic vision that John received during a heaven encounter. He was in the Spirit, and he received revelation straight from heaven. He was accessing the open heaven that we've been talking about these last few weeks. And this is what it says in Revelation 4. After this, I looked, and there before me was a door standing open in heaven, and the voice I had heard speaking to me like a trumpet, he mentions that in chapter 1, the voice said, "Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this." I hadn't seen this before, but I don't think that John saw a door. I think he saw the door. I think he saw Jesus. It was Jesus ministering access to a heaven encounter. But note what happens when John sees the door. He immediately hears the voice. And the voice says, "Come up here and I will show you." And so John went in. He received revelation, and then he came back out. It's what Jesus describes in John 10:9 that we looked at last week. He goes in, he receives revelation, he comes out, and on the earth he writes down what he had seen and heard in heaven. Revelation is a book of in and out. Now, weirdly, when I was growing up, I thought everything that happened in the Bible is a lesson for us to live something similar, but obviously not the same, because those are the people in the Bible, and I'm just me now. Little Paul in Belfast in 1991 or whatever. There's this distance that we put between ourselves and what's in the Bible, and we wrap it up in metaphor, and we say it's a useful lesson. But what it is exactly what's open to us now. I said this last week. What's available to John is available to you. This is the normal Christian life. Jesus didn't open heaven for John only. He opened it for you. The door was the reality. The voice activated the experience of that reality. The door stands open. The voice initiates the encounter. That is why becoming familiar with his voice is an essential access point to the open heaven. I don't really know if I hear from Jesus. Learn. That's how you get to open heaven. Not sure if this is from the Lord or not. It is. Get on with it. It's the access point to the open heaven. This could be my imagination. Yeah, of course it is. The Lord gave you the imagination and he speaks through it. He's speaking. So get on with it. It's an access point to the open heaven. None of that's in my notes. Thank you, Lord. Amen. What I'm trying to say is I think there is something in this about his voice. And it is a big deal learning to hear from the Lord. Entry level is hearing from the Lord for your own life. That's meant to be like oxygen. I was speaking to someone, lovely church leader recently, and I was just talking, he asked me how things were going, and I was talking about going after the presence of God and hearing from him and going for the prophetic. And he said, well, how do you know, what are your mechanisms for making sure you've heard right? And he was thinking of accountability and all that, and that's important. You test words. You test prophetic words. That's what it says in the Bible. But what I was talking about was being a sheep and just learning to hear the Father's voice. the shepherd's voice, Jesus' voice. Normal. So, the voice, I think there's something significant. So let me conclude with the how, okay? So this passage, I think I said last week, when the Lord opens something up to us, he always gives us keys in Scripture of how to access what he's opened. And this passage, I talked about one briefly last week, this passage is full of keys. There's one in verse 17 where he talks about communion with the Father. Intimacy with the Father is a massive door to experiencing heaven. In verse 18, he talks about obedience. I mean, this passage is full of it. You've just got to look at it. Jesus was able to open heaven because he was obedient to the Father. That does not mean that he's done obedience for us. It means he's modeling for us a doorway to heaven. Obedience. In verse 19, there's humility. I've got so much of that, it's ridiculous. There's another thing in the passage called, I call it blowing the grid. A very significant key to experiencing the reality of the heavenly realms is to allow the Lord to blow your grid. You have to let him completely explode all frames of reference that you have for God. That, I promise you, will open insane encounters with heaven if you take God out of the little box. And he's doing it to the Pharisees here. Verse 16, he totally blows their grid. He talks to them about other sheep in the pen. It's not even occurred to them that Gentiles would be welcome. It's outside their grid, and that's why they don't get what he's saying. If you don't get what God's saying, it probably means you're close to heaven. There are keys all over this. And what they do is they're about starting to live a life in which heaven encounters are a real part of your relationship with God, but crucially, a real part of your ministry on earth for God. See, if you're not connected to heaven, you are walking around the wilderness like a sheep without a shepherd. But if you're operating out of heaven, which, as we know, by the way, that's where we're seated, Colossians 3, heaven down is the normal Christian life, then you are devastating to the wolves. They're terrified. The wolves are terrified of sheep that know the shepherd. It's the sheep that have teeth, not the wolves. That's good. I'll write that down sometime. Anyway, the only thing I've got time for today, because I've just extended this sermon by 5 minutes of going off script, is just one key I want to highlight, which is listening. Listening is a key to accessing heaven. If the door is activated by the voice, we have to learn to listen to the voice. Like John in Revelation, listening to the voice will give you access to the door. How do you learn to listen? Same answer I've been giving so far the whole way through this series. Relational intimacy with Jesus through the Holy Spirit. You make time to sit, be still, and hear the still small voice. You make time to sit, be still, That was John's practice. And you see it in Revelation 1. This is what he says. I, John, your brother, was on the island of Patmos because of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus. On the Lord's day, I was in the Spirit, and I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet. That's the beginning of his heaven encounter. That's his pattern. On the Lord's day, I was in the Spirit, and I heard. That's the pattern of his life. The pursuit, praying in the Spirit, and listening. The Lord's Day means Sabbath, a day set aside for the pursuit of God. He's sitting on Patmos in the sun, going after God in the secret place, praying in the Spirit, as we are all told to do, opening the ears of his heart, and heaven opened. People say to me quite often, Paul, I don't have time to pursue God like that. I've got a full-time job. Sundays are full of sport, homework, the food shop, sorting the house for the coming week, people around for lunch. Yeah. So what? You're missing the point. The point is not Sunday, it's Sabbath. It's making time in your week for spiritual communion with the Lord. All the disciples were busy. Jesus, the most harassed of all, never a moment's peace. The busyness of life is not the barrier to accessing heaven. The busyness of your heart is the barrier. You have to be still. You have to still your heart to hear the voice. You need a Sabbath heart. That's what you need. If you walk away from this sermon with one phrase in your head, it's Sabbath heart. How do you do it? I'm nearly done. Promise you, I'm nearly done. There's only 5 or 6 more pages. How do you cultivate a Sabbath heart? Don't set your affections on anything else but the Lord. And you will find that you start to long to be with him. If longing for him is not part of your spiritual life right now, you need to do an MOT on the affections of your heart. All my heaven encounters flow from affection. Heaven always opens up in response to affection. That's why in verse 17, Jesus frames his teaching about hearing the voice of the shepherd in the context of the Father's love. Affection is like a megaphone to God's voice. When I release affection towards him, I hear from him. Don't know if you noticed the Pharisees' reaction at the end of our passage. They're so far away from God's affection that they mistake heaven for hell. They call what is holy demon-possessed. And this is what they say in verse 20. He's raving mad. Why listen to him? They refuse to do the very thing that opens the door. Listen. Elsewhere it says that they shut their ears, cover their ears, and they gnash their teeth. Sounds like hell to me. Closing our ears leads to hell. Listening leads to heaven. The voice is the door. Top tips. Here's a top tip on the how, just so you feel like you've got your money's worth today. Use Lent to do something that will actually have spiritual value. Don't cut chocolate. In fact, have as much chocolate as you like. Instead, use Lent to cultivate a Sabbath heart. Hooray. One that longs to be with him. How might I do that, Paul? I don't know. It's your life, not mine. You're an adult. Get on with it. Stop making excuses. I love you, but, stop. Get up a little earlier to be with God. No way. Okay, I'll try another one. Unplug the TV. My kids are doing that this Lent. Unplug yourself from the iPhone. Just a little each day. And invite the Spirit to speak. Book an hour a week in the 24/7 prayer room here at church. There's a jar on the table called 2-minute prayer topics. You lift the lid, it's like a lucky dip, you pull out the piece of paper, you read the piece of paper, you pray for 2 minutes. I can promise you that jar is full of prayer topics that will help you to cultivate a Sabbath heart. Before you know it, the hour has passed and you can plug yourself back into your iPhone again. Ask to spend time with someone in this church who you know demonstrates the type of heart I'm talking about. Someone who's hungry for the presence, someone who's sold out, someone who's walking higher than you are. It's called discipleship. You don't want to be them, you just want the mantle that they carry. So spend time with some of the incredible spiritual mums and dads. Encounter night, Tuesday night last week, a couple of the spiritual mums in the house, dare I say, slightly older ladies, came to me really excited because they'd just arranged a coffee with 2 of the young adults. We're going for coffee. What they don't know is that shortly after that, those two young adults came up to me and went, we've organized coffee with two of the older ladies. Glory, heaven. Older ladies, you know who you are. Don't mess it up. Okay. Last top tip, whatever. Carve out 2 hours each Tuesday evening in May to come to the prayer ministry course. Starts on the 26th of April. Going to run through all the Tuesdays in May. Done it before? Welcome to come and do it again. The prayer ministry course is about learning to hear the voice, learning how to prophesy, how to engage your imagination, how to operate in the spiritual gift of words of knowledge, how to pursue intimacy in the secret place. It's free. There's so many ways. The key is to learn how to listen to the voice. Because that voice calls you by name and says, hey, come up here and I will show you.